All right. Cheers.
All right,
Frank.
cheers.
Ooh. How's that?
That's really smooth.
I don't know. You a whiskey drinker, Frank?
Kind of. Sometimes, yeah.
Well, hey, man, thanks a lot for coming on the show, taking the time to do this.
It's great being here.
How you been?
I'm having a pretty good week, I think. Things are going smooth. We don't have any COVID to worry about. My events are going strong. So back to normal.
Yeah, speaking of your events, so you're the founder and organizer of China Crossroads.
That's right. So
And that's like, yeah, you explain it in your own words.
yeah, so I've run about 600 public talks over the last 13 years. I do about 70 a year now. The topics range from international affairs to business, to culture and society, and these are public talks. So it's like not behind hotel walls like at a chamber. It's more like in bars and restaurants.
So it's like, wait, you sell tickets? Or
Yeah, that's
you can,
right.
Yeah? Oh,
Yeah,
great.
yeah, it's membership driven, but also ticket driven for non-members.
And you said you were thinking about even dabbling in the podcast space. But are you going to do that?
We'll see. So my members, I used to want to do that, but my members these days say, well, my unique selling points, I'm only in person, only
why is that?
offline.
Because you're so handsome.
Well, I got to get into it. So I think if I try to do something online, I'd have to make it a high quality experience. And if you're comparing like the in-person experience, which is pretty good, and an average, online experience, probably people wouldn't want to pay for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's grown a lot. Like I know I've heard a lot of people mention China Crossroads as well, just like in passing. And you survived the lockdown.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, for us, it's kind of like we could still record, like, virtually, but like,
Yeah, what did you
you're
do?
in person, like,
Yeah, I mean,
how'd
it
you
sucks.
survive?
I couldn't do events for 5 months, so I took a big hit that way personally. And then again, I got to travel to Europe, so that was nice.
Oh.
I'm surprised it's
Yeah.
only 5 months you can do the. I mean, 5 months is a long time. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
like that, it was like I would have thought it would have been longer. Like for the full year, you wouldn't be able to do events.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that way, Shanghai's been better than what people think. I started the company actually in May 2020. That's when I actually registered, and this became my living. And almost no disruption from COVID from 2020 to March 2022. There are definitely a few times when there was like a higher case count. We had fewer people coming, but I never once canceled an event. And that's about 130 events from May 2020 to March 2022.
How does that work though? Because during that time, I know there were like a lot of businesses that weren't allowed to open, like a bar, right? If you ran a bar or something like that.
Yeah.
Like how were you allowed to run the events?
Well, it depends on what bar. I mean, there's different regulations. Certainly in a lot of that time, there'd be a regulation like you can't have more than 50 people in some spaces. Of course, some bars will, if you have 60, they'll be okay. It's not like they're always, constantly monitoring.
They're not going to every
yeah.
place, like counting at heads and...
Yeah, and my average count's 45. I know for a fact one of the bars is like, max 50, but I'm not getting over 50, sometimes, if it's kind of like a tighter period of COVID. So it's not a big issue, actually.
What is like a typical event like? So, for instance, how much talking is there in lecturing?
Yeah.
How much of this like discussion? Like, how much drinking? I don't know. Like, what is it like? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, like the one yesterday was about 45 minutes talk, and it was a pretty normal academic talk, a little dry, and then about 45 minutes an hour of Q&A, and I'm very actively moderating that. So if I think it's getting a little dull, I try to ham it up. I say controversial things. Whatever side is losing, I'll take the losing side. And I'll
yeah.
Sounds like Justin too.
But then we have other events, like we had a talk on Western populism in the same venue about a month ago, and I did very little because it was an excellent talk and very, very clear and great discussion afterwards.
Yeah.
So you asked what it's like. So it's kind of bifurcated. So I used to do everything in bars because that's more fun.
yeah.
And that's the real spirit of openness. These days I don't because it's getting tighter. So I do about half the talks either in a business networking space called White Space, you might know about it, or in a consulate. So I do the really sensitive stuff in two of our consulate partners, totally secure, and that's going to be stuff you can't talk about in public.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
From afar, I mean, I don't know how this might come off to you, given that you've been putting a lot of years into what you do, but like from afar, I feel like your kind of quote unquote rise to fame was more during the lockdown times, because I saw you kind of, that's like before I even knew I knew you. I saw you on CNN, I saw you on BBC, I saw you on all these like media outlets, right?
Yeah.
And you were kind of like the go-to guy for, I think, a lot of the Western media to interview about life in Shanghai during the lockdown.
Yeah, so that's definitely true. I mean, I've been on LinkedIn a while because I'm running this event, and so I already had kind of a pretty big following in Shanghai. That helped a lot. But it was a couple days after we were locked down, I noticed that the Western media hadn't quite gotten to the food aspect of things yet. And I've been on BBC before, and I told them, you got to do this because it's very important. So I think that, I just got ahead of the news by about 24 hours, and I got that appearance. It wasn't just that, though. I mean, there are also journalists, looking around for voices on the ground. There are people looking around LinkedIn. So I got a lot of opportunities that way. And it's not just me, but there are about, 10 other people in Shanghai who got a lot of media at that time because, what's the reason for that? Because there's not enough journalists here. Western journalists used to be much more here. They have visa restrictions, and it was mostly zero COVID, too. And so they're just desperate for real eyewitness accounts.
Yeah, that's true. I think I appreciate, one of the things I feel... one of the things I appreciate about you, which, like, I'll admit I don't do enough myself, is whenever I think we talk about China, everyone obviously has their different opinions and, they lean one way or the other. But, like, often for me, like, the conversation is always centered around, oh, the West doesn't understand China. Like, oh, it's not what it is. Like, it's not what you think on the ground here.
Yeah.
And I still believe all that. But I think, like, I feel where you come from is also going the other way around. Well, there's a lot that China doesn't understand about the West too, and how the West works, and certain quote unquote democracies and things like that, and how that really trickles down and affects society and affects people's beliefs, and it affects kind of maybe even how China would deal with these other countries in terms of international relations and stuff like that. So that's what I really appreciate about you. Is that something like you've consciously wanted to focus on, or is that just kind of how it went for you?
It's definitely true, and I don't know how conscious it is, but my events all these years, about half the attendees are Chinese, and a lot of events have nothing to do with China. Like we had a talk on Western populism a month ago, totally about the West, and it's a lot of people who want to understand what's going on in the West, not just Chinese, but Westerners too. So I mean, what I see my role is not just explaining China to Westerners, but also explaining the West to China, and even explaining the West to Westerners, and explaining China to Chinese, because I don't think we're always right about where we come from.
That's true.
Yeah.
So, like, what have you learned? Like, what are some, like, takeaways that you feel like are top of mind for you in terms of that conversation?
Chinese don't understand liberal democracy for sure. They don't understand how our societies work.
What don't they understand about it?
They don't understand the hidden power of decentralized systems, if I have to put it in the most abstract way. So, I mean, what China is certainly a very centralized system, and it's very good at doing some things. But I think, I give you a little example. So a good friend of mine, former speaker, a really good friend of mine, a scholar here at a university who spent years and years in Europe and worked there to his PhD. Once he asked me, if we do talks in D.C., are we going to get in trouble? I said, we're not getting in trouble. We can talk about whatever we want. But he said, the climate's so bad, and won't we be monitored and all this? I said, it's not. We're not going to get monitored. We're totally fine.
Wait, what was it? Talks in D.C.?
Yeah, I mean, like, what if he said? We're thinking about setting up like a global type of kind of NGO / consulting / events platform, which is kind of in embryonic stage. But we're thinking we'd do events in D.C. and Brussels and other places. And he was just saying, should we watch out in D.C.? I said, no, we don't have to.
Well, who would he like? What was he actually scared of in terms of like who would be monitoring? Like, what was he maybe relating this to based on other experiences?
I mean, he'd be afraid that there'd be government officials in the audience who might report us to somebody to try to keep the dialogue within whatever bounds there might be. Of course, there are none.
Yeah, but and I get that sentiment, and it does make sense. But then, like, this other side of me, like, thinks that, like, historically, like FBI, CIA, like, there's this other side that's just like the U.S. is much more adept at hiding it. Like, it's much more underneath the surface. But then when you read historical accounts 50 years later, it's like, damn, that's some very surveillance kind of stuff going on, right? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the strengths of these centralized systems too, is that we hide. It's good at hiding the coercion, right? And it convinces you're free.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have to distinguish. I mean, he's a Chinese national, so he might be on some list anyway, regardless of what we do in public.
Yeah,
because that's going down right now in the U.S. But we're Americans, so it's we have much less jeopardy about all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, you mean there's a list in America of Chinese nationals?
Certainly, I mean, like if you're doing STEM subjects and you're a Chinese grad student, I mean, I think I don't have personal experience, but definitely some of them are being monitored or having polite meetings with people. I know a scholar of U.S. China who was over there and he had a meeting with the FBI. Nothing happened, but I don't think it's quite like a tea here, but it's some kind of get to know you.
It's a meet and greet.
And I can't say I'm an expert on that at all.
Yeah.
From the other side, I know of Chinese, grad students who've been told by the government,
Yeah.
why don't you tell us what's going on over there in D.C., what you see, and this kind of thing. One I'm thinking of in particular, I mean, that person had a government scholarship, so in exchange for that funding, I think he was asked, and he said no, so it's not like he was coerced to do anything.
He had the choice to just say no. And nothing
Right,
happened to him.
right, yeah.
Okay, I mean, I feel like I'm always the one to like really dumb down the conversation and like just bring it into the muck. But it reminds me of a lot of like recent headlines in the West, about certain balloons and and certain police stations there. I don't know if you guys heard the latest one. They like police stations. In New York City.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, what do you make of all that? Like I mean, in this kind of moment that we're in history.
Yeah.
And all of us here, being from America but living in China for so long.
Yeah.
And kind of having this understanding of both sides, like what's your take on all this?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you on the ground that the balloon incident was much more stressful for Shanghai than you might think, because Shanghai is a city government that's not involved in U.S.-China relations. But I think Shanghai was quite concerned about how this impacts views of China among the expat population. And just because I think that whenever we have these spikes in U.S.-China tensions, the Chinese government is more and more alert because the relationship's getting worse and worse.
Well, what makes you say that? Are there like hard things that you've seen or witnessed or heard that makes you say this? Like what makes you feel that way?
I mean, I talk to Shanghai government officials sometimes, and they say that. They say that this is really very stressful for us because we want. So this is kind of the dynamic. We want a comeback for Shanghai. We want to make up for all this 3 years of stagnation and go back to being a global city. But then what I'm told is that if foreigners have too anti-China a feeling here, that then ruins the chances for Shanghai to have this kind of open society. So it's kind of a tortured logic. But we want to make sure that foreigners don't go outside the bounds so that we can continue to grow Shanghai and make it more attractive and have a global city again, if that makes sense. I think what this government, the party cares about a lot, of course, is that, these Western ideas don't get too influential in China, especially, since zero COVID and since the last 3 years, it's only gotten stronger, right? The ideological imperatives here.
Yeah. Well, that's actually an interesting point. Like when you initially said like, at least the Shanghai government here really cares about their public perception of Westerners living here.
Right.
I mean, in a way, that kind of runs counter, I think, to a lot of expats who are not plugged in like you are. But just like, regular gossip. Like, I feel like their sentiment is like they probably don't care about us at all. And probably really don't they wouldn't care about us at all. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing the things they do.
Right.
But like from your sense and your experience in talking, you're saying that they really do care about how the Westerners feel about them. Well, I mean, from like a self-interest point of view, but still, it's.
Well, definitely last couple months they care because they want FDI to be back up. They want foreigners not only not to leave, but to stay and to come and work and, give them visas and start companies and all that. And that's recent, of course. But over the long term, I mean, the last 10, 20 years, Shanghai has stood out as a place that wants to encourage foreigners to be here. Give you a little data point. So I was talking to a professor at NYU Shanghai not that long ago, and all of us Americans, we have some risk here if there's ever some kind of further tension or conflict. We're not going to be able to stay here. And he has even more risk because he's working for an American company institution, NYU Shanghai. So he's like, are we going to get shut down, or what do you think the time frame is, and all this. And I said, it's very unlikely that the U.S. government's going to shut you down because it has nothing to do with the U.S. government. It's more likely that if tensions get bad, then you're on a list of prominent American companies, and you're not the top of that list where China could retaliate against you. So that kind of connecting to the previous topic, I mean, tensions are going up that way, right? And so it's getting harder and harder, I think, for Americans to see a long-term future here, especially if we have a family, I think. Yeah.
Do you have? You don't have a family yet here, do you?
No, I don't.
Yeah. I mean, if you had one, would you? What would you do?
Well, I think we all have to have some kind of backup plan, especially as Americans. If you're German or French or Polish, it's probably a different calculus. But I think we all should have some kind of like thing lined up abroad if we have to leave within a month, and not because of, just simply because of geopolitical tension.
Yeah, well, like what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like we never really did a deep dive in terms of what future prediction, that we've ever discussed based off of these bilateral tensions. I mean, what does that mean? What if it does get worse? I mean, what could possibly happen for us being Americans living here, right?
Yeah.
Get kicked out? I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but what else could happen?
Why couldn't you just have your visa annulled or avoided? Why not? I mean,
but that
why
can
not?
happen anywhere, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll share like 2 or 3 sort of, I guess, things that happened, and then we want to hear the response. But like number 1, it was impossible to get a visa to China for a couple of years, right? Like we're not looking into the future. We're just saying for this particular period of time, for whatever reasons, it was like impossible to come back, right? Number 2, all the flights, like inbound, outbound, were canceled due to, the policies that were put in place. And this was exceptional compared to like every other country, right? So if you just look at that as a model for what's possible, most countries can't really do that kind of same stuff, regardless of the reason. And then if you look at like the number 1 source of tensions right now, like at really, really big geopolitical level, like you can name the 2 players involved. So why not? Why couldn't we all get kicked out? I mean, if the U.S. can put, citizens that were born in America, like I have sort of indirect family that were in, in camps, right? Internment camps. If the U.S. can put its own citizens born in the U.S., born and raised in the U.S. in a camp, I mean,
Wait. You had family in internment camps?
I have, I have family that was, that basically married into the family whose direct family were in internment camps.
Well, was this like World War II
Yeah,
era?
yeah. So, I mean, like, what's not possible?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
I mean, all you have to do is look at Russia right now. So there's no state of war between the U.S. and Russia, but certainly the United States has encouraged all citizens to leave Russia, and it's not really safe for Americans there. And there's a Wall Street journalist now, journalist in jail there. I mean, that doesn't apply to us, of course, but if there's a state of heightened conflict like that, we'd all be encouraged to leave. I'm not sure that China then, gets rid of all of our visas, and there's a lot of us here too. But I think most of us will be leaving, partly also from family and friend pressure. Honestly, it's not necessarily going to be political. And then also, it differs. That we're Americans, we can always be accused of, being of the enemy and doing the work of the enemy in a state of war. That's, that your family was interned, unfortunately, for those kinds of considerations, right? The Germans had a bad experience in World War I too, and when conflict arises, that's what governments do. So it behooves us all to leave.
It becomes a witch hunt.
Well,
right?
and
you don't want to be here if there's conflict.
And I think that the interesting thing with this group sitting here at the table is that we've got it on both sides.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like we're
Well, that's where the anxiety.
Literally, both sides come down on you.
Exactly.
Well, that's what me and Howie have always been talking about. It's like this anxiety, right? Because exactly what you're saying, Eric. It's like we're feeling the pressure on both sides, and there's no clear. Number 1, there's no clear winner, and number 2, there's no clear good guy or bad guy, in the situation. So it's like really precarious.
Yes. I think just to paint it really clearly for the listeners out there, if we were to go back to America, being Chinese, they would be like, "You've been living in China for this long, blah blah blah. Maybe you can have a little bit of weirdness towards you." And then us being American but Chinese here, you can also be like, "Well, your background."
Yeah.
It's the best of both worlds.
I mean, we had it good for a while.
Yeah.
But I mean, we are being speculative. Like we are kind of saying, like, I mean, there's nothing, or I could be wrong, and I'll throw this to you, Frank. But from that, since the lockdown has been lifted, and at least here, the city is starting to feel a sense of normalcy again. It's coming back alive. I mean, there's nothing immediately, I think, at least in my day to day, that is like a real red flag. I don't know how you feel about that, Frank.
Yeah, so you're not
Not yet, at
involved.
least.
You're not involved in you're not involved in doing talks in the public sphere, and I am. So I'm not going to maybe elaborate more, but certainly I feel that because I've talked about this a lot in other kind of situations, but I think it's really important to understand what this government's all about, like why it was founded, why we have a one-party state, and one reason we have it is because China needed to develop very quickly. It had to mobilize its population to accomplish national aims, right? That's what the system is for, not only China, but also the Soviet Union, Vietnam. And one part of that is to make sure that one power is able to monopolize all organizational capacity around society. That's why we don't have other groups in China, right? And that's for good or bad reasons. I mean, it's also able to do things like COVID control or develop the economy very quickly and all this kind of thing. But what that means is that this government frowns on civil society actors that gather too much organizational power. So, you'd mentioned before, we could talk about, I've been in media 40 times, global media, and there's no problem with that. Why? Because that doesn't affect China. That's people abroad, who are listening to stuff on China. But if it affects people on the ground here, the government's more concerned. Right, so you don't feel it, but certainly people do. If you're the American Chamber of Commerce, you do too. Yeah, anybody's doing stuff in that space.
How have you felt it?
Well, I think maybe we should talk offline about that. But it's quite. If you want me, I can. But one of the things I do, actually, honestly, is to try to educate Westerners and Americans about their own system. That's not going to happen to you in America. It's simply not. No matter how you look, you organize an event in public, you're not going to be people on you like that. It's a different system. And the difference, too, is in America, if that happens, there's a lot of groups you can appeal to. Here, there's only the party. Like, let's say you're really the target of a racial bias incident or the FBI is after you. You just talk to whatever groups you know, and that gets in the media, and that pressures the government. Right? I mean, there's so many ways of getting in there in America.
There's a lot more checks and balances, it sounds like.
It's all about decentralized power. So there's so much decentralized power, so many different groups going on that, you're not as much jeopardy. But here, the whole idea of the state is to have one power. And that's not to say that China's a bad place. It's not even to say we don't have freedoms here. I'm just simply describing the kind of the spirit of the way this one-party Leninist state actually works. We can have markets. We can have, great consumer trends. All that's compatible with this original institutional setup.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive.
Right. And that's kind of the genius of this government, too, to make them all compatible. Right? Yeah.
But you were saying that in China, like Russia, Vietnam, certain places, due to the context of the time, like they needed to establish things really quickly. They had to quickly set up like this single power to support that growth. And I'm just curious, like, can you kind of re-articulate what you said? I thought it was kind of interesting and like some of the background behind that. I
mean, sure, it's just about the history of the communist movement in the 20th century. And, it wasn't just China, but also the Soviet Union that felt like it had to catch up to the West. And, you can go things the natural kind of free market way, which in the long term probably provides for more prosperity. That's the record. But if there's a recipe for growth and you know how to accomplish that, that could be the Soviet Union, making a lot of steel and concrete in the 30s. It could be, China developing its nuclear program way ahead of time in the early 60s. You want to make sure that all society's on board for that, and there's less argument and contestation, which is why we can't accomplish things quickly in the West. So if there's a roadmap and the government has the right policy, it can be much faster, more effective not to have these voices in society, right? I mean, you could argue China's entire economic growth plan was a pretty successful one, and if we'd had different parties arguing the whole time, we wouldn't have accomplished this. And that's a good argument from China's side, right? So there are reasons why we have this kind of system, and I'm not saying it's a bad system by its own very nature. I'm just saying that it's a key part of that is making sure we don't have too much dispersion of power among different actors in society, right? And that has actually very little to say about like what you can say or do. Like that's not freedom of speech. It's not about, it's freedom of association and how much different actors can organize. And
like, Well, that makes sense, right? So like because maybe the misconception from the West is that like, okay, they just arbitrarily, whoever it is, right?
Yeah,
Whether it's
right.
China, whatever government, arbitrarily cracks down. But they're not, right? It's like they have a specific goal in mind. And their goal is to make sure that they can, like, the country can grow so like people can have food. And like, I mean, it's in their best interest as well, right? Like if everyone's fucking starving, it's not good for them.
Yeah, I definitely say that. So what's a tyranny? You know, what's that? That's when you have some one guy who just he feels bad one day and he punishes somebody, and one day he feels good and he doesn't punish somebody. That's a truly arbitrary government. You know, there was more of that in China for sure back in Mao's day, but since then, not really. It's a country with a certain kind of governing institution that kind of makes sense with its own logic. Yeah. And I think zero COVID is not a bad example of this. So yeah, it was unfair to a lot of people, but I think China's coming out of it with vastly fewer deaths, but also less hit on economic growth than other countries. I mean, if you look back on it, we were locked down. Of course, we didn't have a great experience, but the vast majority of China didn't have, or at least more than half of China didn't have nearly as bad experience as us, right? So that's example how government could do things pretty well, right?
Yeah. But I think like the stigma of like the tyranny kind of cliche almost. I mean, at least from maybe Western viewers, they still have that sense or feel that way about China. Probably having never been here, or even maybe some who have.
Oh yeah, I mean you can divide it into Westerners and Americans, but Americans definitely just see the word communist and think that we're all living in complete tyranny, which is absolutely untrue, of course. And what's the reason for that? It partly is that Americans don't think about other countries, but partly it's just about thinking about these things a long time and having the distinctions in your head. You know, if you spend a lot of time thinking about anything, you see the nuances, right?
Yeah.
And so tyranny is not communism. You can have markets and also have this Leninist system. It's all compatible, actually. But if you never thought about it before, and you're thinking about the Cold War and the Soviet Union, of course, you're going to use the wrong analogy.
Yeah, the old stereotypes, right?
Right. And it happens here, too. I mean, the West is still called the capitalist world here, and there's still a lot of assumptions about the West and China that don't make a lot of sense, too.
Like what?
Okay, so, for example, with the whole, Russia-Ukraine war, it's always, the assumption in China is that America is manipulating the whole thing. And a lot of people will also say for, profit or for, capitalist ends. This is actually Lenin's analysis of why the Soviet Union should start to oppose the imperialist West, actually. And there's definitely, profit motives there. There's economics, but it's not about that. And Europe has its own autonomy, too. It's not like we're all, one unified bloc, this kind of thing, the way Putin assumes as well.
Well, what do you think it is about, in your opinion?
The whole Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Yeah.
I mean, it's about Western values. I think it's about our community, this Western community, reasserting itself, and it's especially about Europe realizing that it's also in some jeopardy, security-wise, from Russia.
Yeah. Okay. Having studied politics for as long as you have, right, and speaking to as many people, and obviously your own critical thinking and your own kind of views on it, we were just talking kind of about the Chinese system, the American system, very surface level stuff. Yeah. But we're talking about it. Is it, in your mind, is there some sort of hybrid perfect system? Like if you were to create your own version of utopia today, have you ever thought about how it would run, Because I don't think any of the systems that we mentioned are perfect, right? They all come with their flaws and they all come with their positives. Is there something maybe in the middle or something completely different that we haven't thought about that you think probably would work better if life was a video game and you can just start from scratch again?
Yeah, so I don't know what that system would be, but whatever it is, it's going to have a base that's not dissimilar from our current Western liberal democracies. So you're going to have a constitution, you're going to have a certain set of rights. If you get in trouble, you'll have a right to a jury trial. You'll have freedom of speech. I'm pretty sure that whatever happens in the future, that'll be the basis. That's not to say that America doesn't have, it certainly has many problems. You can compare to places like Germany that functions somewhat better, it has more healthy parties, more healthy debate, but it has that basis, right? So, I just speak from my own assumptions. I'm not, we often can't escape where we're from, right? So if you ask someone from China, they might say, well, it may be good to have, a single power and avoid all the ridiculous debate we have in America. So it's hard not to start from your own assumptions. But if you look at the direction of history, you see why the Communist Party is worried, because when it was founded, there were many regimes like it. Now there are very few. And whatever you say about American foreign policy, America has been trying to change China for sure. And I think the Communist Party is right to feel threatened by America. And I don't mean security containment. I don't mean like alliances. I mean how our values spread and how that could have changed China in the recent past, and how America did change many, many, many countries. I was in a meeting with the U.S. consulate just 2 weeks ago, and one diplomat was like, we can't change China. It's got 1.4 billion people. And I said to him, America's changed more than 1.4 billion people over the last 200 years, and it could do so again. And that's just history. That's not necessarily like a pro-American view.
That's not an opinion. Yeah, that's a fact.
I think part of it is that, here's what I think. So I think that in many ways I sympathize with the party here in China, because I understand the America threat. That's the threat to the way of life of a different country, a different path, right? If China had liberalized 40 years ago, we may not have the kind of the modern China we have today, right? And if you just look at history, America has had a huge effect in changing other countries, and you can't deny that it has that power. So I think that Americans, especially America's government, should be conscious of the power it yields and conscious of how other people perceive that power, which is often considered arbitrary. Certainly, they didn't have a vote, whether you're Australia or China or other countries or Germany, and they're very resentful of America for that reason. Yeah. So So part of what I'm saying is that how Westerners can understand ourselves, we should know that we have had a lot of power.
Well, I think
yeah.
the U.S., and obviously it's a very vague title and general title, but for the purposes of this conversation, I think the U.S. is aware of the power that they wield. Otherwise, they wouldn't be using it so often, right?
Well, but then the U.S. also claims, not to be containing China, and claims to have an open hand about, welcoming China in this.
Well, of course, that's what they're going to say publicly, but all governments are going to say, be more bureaucratic publicly.
Right.
I'm curious. So you have two different systems, right? I mean, just to simplify, right? You have the U.S. system, and you have the system here, and they seem like incompatible. Like, for instance, when you said like a market economy, all this stuff, like the Chinese government, the genius is to have that be compatible with the one party rule, right? But it seems like the liberal democracy and then the system here are not compatible in the sense that they're just fundamentally two different systems.
Right.
So and obviously China's all in on its system, right?
Yeah,
because you said, it's not good or bad or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, let's put aside judgment for a moment. How does China then see this stuff playing out? Does it feel like it can just be a small number of places with this particular system?
Right.
And then, because the U.S. doesn't feel that way, right? It's very clear that the U.S. is no, for us to keep our way of life, everyone has to have this system, because if everyone doesn't have the system, then there's a threat. And that's very clear in its foreign policy. It's pretty hardcore,
Well,
right?
the old domino theory.
Yeah, all that stuff. I mean, it's and that explains why it's so aggressive in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone has to ultimately be a liberal democracy for them to feel secure that our system is, the U.S. system is working.
Right.
But because so many countries now are kind of in this direction, what is China's view on this? Do they feel like there can ultimately in 100 years be a world where half the governments are autocracies or single power and then half are liberal democracies? What's their feeling? How do they see this playing out?
I mean, China definitely wants diversity in the world. It wants space for its own system, right? And so it's going to reject that dichotomy by America. Just speak on America for a second. I think that this kind of with us or for us, autocracy versus democracy debate that from Biden and Trump is also off-putting to many American allies and other liberal democracies. They don't see this as being Cold War, two.
Zero sum.
And the fact is China's not trying to spread its system of government abroad, right? That all being said, though, I think China is always saying it's America or the West that has a Cold War mentality and trying to undermine us and spread their values. And there's a lot of justification in that, actually, in terms of trying to change people's values. But I think China downplays the extent to which it really is, it is a system that's very similar to the Soviet Union ultimately. And one, so I've studied a lot of party ideology books too. So I mean, I think a lot of Chinese will say we're a civilization, we're a culture, downplay that aspect of it. But certainly when we were here and in lockdown, we knew pretty clearly what kind of state it was, because that couldn't happen elsewhere, right? And I'm not saying, my girlfriend went to the hospital that time. I didn't have a great experience. It was really tough getting medical care. But that system, that would have been different in a different system, just because we had the neighborhood committee on top of us and we couldn't go anywhere, right? And the way it was able to implement that was, reflected certain strengths of the system, in that it could mobilize all of society down to the building level. And that's one way China still is continuous with the communist system from before. So I hope that helps answer the question a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's good. It's like very. I mean, we're just learning, like getting insights, and it feels like, like if you have a world where there's autocracies, right?
Yeah.
Then the autocracies kind of it feels like they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to manage my business and do things a certain way, and then there might be like other systems out there. Right. And so like, is there like strong sense of competition? Like, so from a liberal democracy perspective, like how much competition is there? How aggressive do I need to be to stamp out all the communism? And then from like an autocracy perspective, like how interested are they in making sure like everyone's an autocracy? Because these are competing sort of visions, and if they both sides are completely competing, then only one can ultimately exist, and there's going to be like war. Right. Even if one side strongly wants it to be that way, there's going to be war. So it just feels like we're in this no-win situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely more on the American side than the Chinese side. China is not interested in its system being, everywhere. And I guess you can quote Tolstoy, right? Like, every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Every happy family is happy in the same way. You could just replace that with democracy, right? I'm not saying democracy is a happy place, but autocracy is very, very diverse. It's not, China and Russia are very, very different. They're very, very different regimes. They don't have a one-party state there, for example. And so, it's hard to say that there's monolithic autocracy and trying to, like, take over the world. Now, on the Western side, back in the Cold War, actually the West was unified. Certainly Europe felt very threatened by the Soviet Union, which was right there. But a big challenge for America now is to try to convince other countries that China somehow is a threat to them. And I don't think they're quite convinced. Right now, America holds a lot of cards, of course, because it has all these bases, and it has a lot of carrots and sticks. But I think a risk for America going forward is, can you really keep these allies on board about containing China?
That seems to be like a big talking point now, right, in media, where it's not about China being bad in their own system as an isolated country, right? It's now like, no, they're going to come out at us.
Yeah.
They're coming for us, as if historically speaking, China did that.
Yeah, it's weird. But like, we're also getting into the economics of it all, right? Like the finance and trade. I think that's the big driver of this stuff. And a lot of like the hot keywords now are de-dollarization, multipolar world, and like, what's your take on that in terms of like, do you really feel that it is becoming a multipolar world, and is that sustainable? Just even from an economic standpoint.
In terms of other countries developing, it's been becoming multipolar for a long time, right? I'm not a finance expert. I don't predict, the U.S. dollar not being the reserve currency anytime soon. But I think the Western system is also surprisingly resilient. That's what 2022 taught us. No one would have expected that NATO would have been strengthened by this war, or that these European countries would have aligned with America on this. So, what's a multipolar world? America is not going to be number one forever, for sure. But as long as there's a cohesion to the West, including Japan, South Korea, Australia, and other kind of like aligned democracies, China has an uphill battle. The combined GDP of these countries far exceeds China, and China will never exceed it. Yeah.
Well, also geographically, it's just like,
even the population approaches China. So it's a very large block. And I think to sympathize with China, when you think about if you look at the party, what it talks about, it does feel threatened by Western power. It doesn't want China to go the way of the Soviet Union, right? And there's no other. Vietnam is a far second to China in having this kind of regime in this world. China's quite isolated, right?
I mean, is it more of like, because I think a lot of the portrayal of in the West, and it's really kind of like romanticized, through Hollywood and everything, is always like, the red states are always, or the red countries are always like kind of power hungry, right? Like they're power hungry.
Yeah, right.
But from what I get the sense of, and especially after listening to you, it's less power hungry in terms of like I want to spread, but it's more like we're trying to keep like ourselves intact almost, for our own kind of survivability.
Yeah, put it simply, I mean, the only reason why Russia and China are lining up is because they feel threatened by this monolithic, threatening liberal democracy that could change them, right? Yeah, so I would definitely say the aggressor here is much more the Western system.
Yeah. Okay, so I have to admit, I completely failed because I think like when we were chatting, before I brought you on, before we did this show today, I was like, maybe let's not get too political, like, talk about some social things.
Right.
And then we go right into the heart, right into the dark heart of all the politics and pushing all the limits of this
You're
episode.
You're going to have a huge editing task.
Yeah. We're pushing all the limits of this episode today. But I guess, okay, I mean, like maybe to shift gears a little bit, like from a social standpoint, of like what's top of mind for you in terms of what stands out? What are the issues that stand out to you today? What do you think are kind of like the more pressing concerns that from your vantage point from like socially?
What do you mean? Like here in China or?
It can be anything. It can be anything. It can be China. It can be outside.
I don't know. It's hard to say, honestly. Don't know how to answer the question.
Yeah. It's a loaded question. I'll give you that. It's a loaded question. Okay, well let's narrow it down a little bit. Let's say in China.
Okay. Again, it's hard to say. I mean, it's just kind of a big question. Yeah. I mean, what would I want? Like how values to change in China, that kind of thing, or?
Well, sure. I mean, like, what are some things you've talked about in terms of pertaining to the society with the people you've talked to, the lectures you've been listening to?
Yeah.
Even market trends, the way the local community is viewing the West,
because
itself.
The way I see you is like you're kind of like that guy that's been mingling and talking and reading and holding all these events and stuff like that. Like we've been kind of living in our own bubble, right?
Yeah.
To be honest, so it's like from you, like you're the outsider coming in. Like, okay, what are some like, well, what is the world like now from Frank's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I see, half of our attendees are Chinese who, mostly have spent a lot of time in the West, studied there, or worked there before. So, I do see a trend where, back 10 years ago, there was a lot greater desire to identify with the West or like whatever school you went to abroad and this kind of thing. And that's gone down a lot, I think, these days. And, those communities are also less vibrant, like the different alumni clubs from before and this kind of thing. So, and, it's partly also the 3 years when we were isolated, so there's just been fewer interactions back and forth. But, just to, I always go big picture, but that's a big issue, like for China, right? So how many, how many Chinese are there who really identify with, who have studied abroad or identify with, Western institutions or companies? It's going to go down, I mean, over the long term, right? And that's, if you want to predict, is China going to integrate in the world? Well, a big force for that was all these folks, right? But I think that mass of people is going to go down over the long term, which means less integration.
Didn't it seem like it was just a huge shift once COVID hit?
Yeah.
It was like a monumental shift, because before it was trending up, right? Like,
yeah, right.
Even the returnees coming back, like working with Fortune 500 companies internationally that have stations in China.
Right.
Powerful voices, and all of a sudden, ever since COVID, everything just seems to just shift, and now it's much more inclusive. Right. And even with companies and hiring processes, they're looking for locals more as opposed to foreign educated.
Yeah.
I kind of see that as like a compounding of like a perfect storm of things, right? And I might be oversimplifying it, but like I just feel like, okay, one is COVID, which was a major world event, obviously, and then at the same time, right before that, you had the trade wars, and then you have the like kind of like it looks like skyrocketing escalation of tensions, like namely between China and the US.
Now more than ever.
Yeah. So and then you have like the technology battle, and then the economic things going on. So it just feels like kind of like this perfect storm of things that if we lived in an alternate dimension where none of that other shit was going on and it was just COVID, for example.
Yeah,
I believe
right,
like after
right.
like let's say after COVID, everything would kind of just like bounce right back, right? And then we'd be on the good path again. But because it wasn't just COVID and all these other compounding issues, it's keeping things going in a direction that's not so great, at least it seems for now.
A lot of it's really natural too. I mean, just China's developed and people have gotten richer. Why should you admire the West? Why should you study there? Why should you be proud of having spent a lot of time there? That's a very natural thing too. So we were talking about dating right before we started, and I was saying that if you compare like 15 years ago, you're an Asian man, whatever nationality, it's probably hard to date a let's say a white girl, right?
Or non-Asian.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Globally, but now it's a lot easier, and that's partly because China's risen, right? And there's more power. And that sounds kind of like, a little facetious or kind of off the top, but it's actually really relevant. I mean, the more power you have, the more you're admired, the more dateable
honestly,
you are.
I think it has more to do with K-pop than
K-pop
and the rise of China.
even Japanimation, right? Like
right.
manga.
It's also soft power.
Because that's more pop culture,
right.
right?
Pop culture, man.
Yeah, it's not just that. It's
That's how America rose to power. I mean,
every country in the world, women want to marry higher status and more money, even if they deny it, like in Sweden.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that. It's about power and money. So as dating goes, the same goes for politics, I think. Yeah.
Well, we've kind of had this conversation before on the show in terms of, us being, Asian American, and I've talked about this in terms of my personal experience growing up in the States, is that, I always felt really shy, especially to confronting, girls that were not Asian,
Where'd you grow up?
In New Jersey.
Okay. Yeah, I grew up in South Carolina, but I was born in New Jersey, and I spent like some of my childhood there too.
Okay, great. Yeah, I grew up in Jersey, and I was like kind of like the token Asian guy. So I was like a predominantly white community.
Yeah,
that I grew up in.
yeah.
And so when you're growing up and you're a kid and you're in school, like you go to parties and you socialize, and then most pretty much like 99.99% of everyone there is like white or black or something like that. And then so like all in terms of a social life or dating, like it was mostly white girls, and I would have a disproportionate level of anxiety approaching a white girl than an Asian girl.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in terms of how much of that is just your internal kind of self-talk and like putting yourself down that you're not good enough, or victim complex, or whatever you want to label it, versus how much is it objectively like white girls maybe on the whole statistically didn't find Asian males as sexually attractive, like how much of that is the raw truth and how much of that is just our own internal noise.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you haven't done a whole episode on this, you should. I think it's a great topic.
Yeah. Well, did you?
Frank, okay. So when we kind of talk about this topic, right?
Yeah.
Compared to 15 years ago, is it just like what actual demographic are we talking about? Are we saying that like all Chinese men are more desirable in general? Like in general, they're more desirable, or is it like, what if you're from Vietnam, or what if you're from Japan, or what if you're from Korea? Right.
Right.
Is it an like what is your sense on that?
So I think I'm limiting it to like non-Americans. I think because I think it's going to be different in the U.S. But just your some people in the world, women. If they hear you're from Japan in the late 80s or early 90s, they're like, ooh, wow, it's a pretty successful country, and probably you're doing well in the world. And I think it goes for China now more and more. I think it's just that simple,
Well,
so people from China, like
yeah. But the thing is, we're going to be considered, those folks, they won't know, right?
Right.
So you could be Vietnamese or and also be considered, from China.
Well, what, are you speaking from like personal experience? Like where are you getting this feeling from?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been on Tinder a long time, and I used to go to Europe a lot, before, and then I had the data. I mean, it just goes up. You get more hits over time.
Wow.
Just that simple,
Interesting.
yeah. And
Yeah, that's really interesting.
yeah.
So like in real time, you're saying I'm getting more hits,
But
I'm getting more results.
it sounds like it's about data, but it's also about the news. It's about how China is, there's a lot of negative news about China too, but I think more and more curiosity because it has more power, right? And so many Europeans have told me, whether men or women, are like, oh, everything in Europe is negative about China. I'm really curious what's really good. I mean, it's just a topic. It's a hot topic around the world, and it's not a poor. That's a key thing. It's not a poor country anymore, right? And so people are more curious.
Well, that's interesting in terms of the media because like I feel like we get too tunnel vision just because of our background on just what's happening in the U.S. as it relates to China and what people feel about there. But like, I mean, in your experience talking to like, let's say Europeans or other people in other countries that are outside the U.S. I mean, it's a big world, right?
Yeah.
Like what are like they do have like a general like sense of curiosity about China because it just feels like in my world, and it could again just could be like maybe like the stuff that I'm absorbing is just like doesn't seem like there's a true curiosity. It just feels like people are just believing the headlines, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, but is that not the case? Like,
I mean,
let's say outside the
it's
US?
both true. There's so much bias around the world against China because all the news is all groupthink and anti-China, and the publics aren't curious, right? But I'm just it's just the sample sizes, right? I mean, if you're in a dating situation, probably that you've selected for someone who is more curious, and that's that base is still growing. It's just small, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just because China is a powerful country in the news.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, like also just facetiously, it's like maybe your Tinder game has just gotten stronger.
Yeah, it could be that too. Yeah. But I wanted to get back to what you were saying, like, growing up Asian American and how that affects, dating and all that kind of thing. It's a really tough. So I'm a sociologist by training. I did a PhD in sociology a long time ago, focused on China. So I kind of kick in that gear, and you got to blame society, right, in some ways, because it puts in our minds the image of I don't know, mainstream partners like white women versus Asian women, and then it puts in their mind certainly very few. Your average American woman's not going to have an Asian man in their mind as far as the ideal partner goes, right? So you can blame society that way. And I've given a lot of thought to this. I think there's also something in American culture that makes it tough for us because America's very extroverted, out there kind of like self-promotional culture, and we were all raised by Chinese parents generally, right? And so you're going to have some of the values that you grew up with, and we're simply not that way, Now, is that discrimination? That just could be cultural difference. Like, then what is discrimination then exactly? We're smaller people too. I mean, around the world, you look at the data, but generally, men date shorter women and vice versa, right? And that's not discrimination. But,
that's just the hard truth of it.
You know what's interesting is like when Justin was describing his experience dating non-Asians, I was just thinking about my personal one because I also grew up in I did not have Chinese friends or anything like that. I had some Filipinos. There was a lot of Filipinos in the area. But I never once thought or felt negative about my experiences with women as a Chinese person. I always just thought, I'm just not hot enough, or I'm just not cool enough, or something like that, right?
Yeah,
just a very general guy thing.
Like it had nothing to do with your race.
Nothing to do with my race.
Yeah.
Not until I left that area, went to college, and all of a sudden I'm surrounded by a lot more Asians and a lot more Asian like pooling, and then I started noticing. Then I started thinking, wait a minute, is it because I'm Chinese? Is it because I'm Asian?
Yeah. So, that's what kind of social sciences will teach you. That it's very rarely about the individual. It's about societal, values and structures, and that was because you were Asian for sure. Well, I mean, definitely our personalities make a big difference. There's lots of Asian guys who get lots of dates and a lot of non-Asian guys who get none, and their personality is a factor too. But I mean, come on, when you meet somebody the first time, race is going to be one of the things you process immediately, along with other things like
Well, and there's a distinction there, right? It's like kind of how much of it is the lack of certain qualities that are recognized as attractive because a certain group of people grew up in a certain environment, right? So that's one aspect, and it really could be that way. And then, like you're saying, like how much of this is sort of like some type of prejudice, like you have these qualities, but I just don't like you, because I associate you with a certain race. So even though you have all these qualities, you're like a 6'3" Asian dude with like huge muscles and you're charismatic and all that stuff, I still don't like you. And I have to think it's like a combination of these things because like growing up, like I would have like, okay, first of all, there were a lot less Asian friends of mine that were dating non-Asian people, like, and it's getting more and more common.
Yeah.
Right. And at the same time, like, I did know people that were just like, they didn't give a fuck that they were Asian, right? And they just, you know, they were just as cocky as the next person, and then somehow they were able to transcend those differences as well. So I think it's like, it's not one thing; it's a combination.
Right.
But certainly, if you were Asian and you had all the right qualities, like, you probably wouldn't be quite as successful as someone like Caucasian, just because, like, the similarity factor, because everyone, you know, like, people are going to kind of mix with people that are similar to them.
Yeah. So it's definitely both things. But we'd all say that, you know, how we look and our cultural backgrounds in American society is it's a two-factor model, and one's going to be Asianness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's important.
It's transcendable. It's just a little bit harder.
Yeah,
And because
yeah.
like, you grow up in an environment where you're taught and, you know, you're influenced by certain values, then it just becomes a little bit more difficult. But, like, I mean, at the same time, like, you know, we had like another guest, Larry, on last week, right? And he was just saying, you know, when he came to China for the first time in the 80s and 90s, like, I mean, all the Chinese people here thought he was kind of a celebrity just because, you know, the way he spoke, what he dressed, and all that stuff.
Right.
So, like, I mean, we're all genetically Asian. However, like, how you carry yourself, the clothes you wear, the accent that you have also shapes people's perception.
Yeah.
Well, that's a thing, right? It's like, even without opening your mouth, back in the day when we visit, automatically people would be like, "You're not from around here," right? Just because of the way you're styled, even like your hair or.
But it's like, so don't we see a lot of quote unquote white privilege here in Shanghai? You know, because definitely if you're foreign looking, you're treated better here, right?
Still, you think? I feel like it's going down though. No,
It's going down,
Yeah.
but I think it still exists. I mean, that's my life. I don't know about yours. I'm fluent in Chinese, so when I speak to people in Chinese, people often don't know. They probably think I'm from some province because I have an accent. But definitely, I mean, that's partly Shanghai culture too. If you speak English, people treat you better. Sure.
But I don't think the let's focus on the white expats here. I don't think they feel that way. You know, when I talk to them, they feel like they're the victims almost. Like, I get that feeling like oh, we can't get away with the same things you guys can. You guys can.
That's
pass.
like Donald Trump then. What the fuck?
I mean,
No, but there is a certain truth. Like, we can pass more than they
Donald
can.
Trump
They stand
thinks
out
he's
like
a victim.
They stand out like a sore thumb. But then at the same time, from our vantage point, like, there is like this white privilege going on. So it's like, I think from your vantage point, you either see yourself like everyone kind of sees themselves as a victim almost.
I think they're wrong. I mean, definitely, I'd rather be us because we see a lot more here. You know, and we can really get into it. And it's unfortunate, you know, China, not just China, but a lot of societies don't let other, you know, people who look like foreigners really get into society, not just China. But so we're lucky in that way. But definitely, I mean, how many non-Asian people you know in Shanghai? They're like, wow, Chinese are so nice. This is a great place. I'm treated with such respect. And that's just not true. This is a pushy place. I mean, because I spent time in Taiwan, of course. So that's my comparison. Taiwanese are super nice.
Super nice.
There's nothing about Chinese culture that means you have to be pushy and brash. But I think it's a very people speak really quickly here too.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I'm in Taiwan, like I'm accused of being a mainlander. So I'm in the taxi, and I'm just like you know, I'm like, you know, 到火车站吧. And then they're like, and they start cursing me in like Taiwanese because they think I'm some mainland tourist.
You're rude.
Because you're supposed to say, 麻烦司机, 可不可以带我去火车站吗? You know that
Yeah,
that
when you're in Taiwan, right?
Yeah, but I just you know, I live here. I speak Chinese the way people here do. So. I'm just trying to make the point that most non-Asian foreigners won't see is that this is a pretty brash, direct place that's not very polite.
But isn't that?
You know? But it's getting better all the time, for sure.
I feel that's
you compare it to 15 years ago, it's much better. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
But I also feel like the whole brash and pushy kind of thing is a common trait through all like the major big metropolitan cities throughout the world. If
Definitely,
you go to
right.
New York City, you go to Paris.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
definitely.
like
that's part of it too, because you know I go to Suzhou now every week to teach, and people are much nicer there. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. New Yorkers are known to be pushy. New Yorkers are known to be crass.
But you're right. It's also depends on how big the city it is.
Yeah, I feel like it's like a common
What are
thing.
the indicators for you when you, because a lot of this is subjective, right?
Yeah.
But clearly, like, you travel a lot, like
Yeah.
you studied sociology, so you have a bit more maybe, you know, kind of insight into this. But like, what are the indicators for you in a city that would cause you to describe it as like nice, softer versus like brash?
Yeah, I guess it's going to be like, you can count, how many words per minute probably for strangers, how many useless words like 麻烦事情, all that kind of thing, or please, or would
Like
you mind?
niceties.
Yeah. So, in a big city, you'll
We
have
call
less
manners.
of that. Yeah. But I mean, so I don't know if your parents are from Taiwan, mine were from Taiwan. So when I was growing up, a lot of it was like, oh, these mainlanders coming to our community, they're very pushy. So maybe I'm a little biased too. But you can also look at the language. I mean, if you're language is much more direct here than in Taiwan. Just simply the way things are written, actually, and it's partly because of this regime, and it was designed for the workers and the peasants, right? So it's much more simpler and direct. Yeah,
I think there is
right.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I think there probably is a correlation between population size and how direct people are.
Yeah.
Right, because
yeah,
like
right.
when it's a large population, there's more competition for resources. There's less
Right.
bullshit. People just like with the lining up here. No one like I mean historically, people don't usually line up. They go run right to the front. They don't have this concept of queuing necessarily historically. I mean, I think that all stems from just like the amount of people here fighting over
survival.
resources.
Yeah.
You got to survive. There's no time for politeness, right?
Every developing country has a queuing problem, so it's not just China, and China doesn't really have one anymore.
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
gotten much better.
Yeah, much better.
They're the masters of queuing here. I mean, it is like so fucking efficient here.
Well, we've talked about this before, in terms of like one of the adjustments we had to make with life here in Shanghai. At least for me, I'll speak for myself. Was I used to, and I still catch myself doing this today, is
Spitting.
squatting and spitting. No, no, is saying thank you when it's not necessary.
Oh, absolutely,
here in the
right,
context
right,
here to
right.
say thank you.
Absolutely.
Because I think the way we were growing up is like thank you is almost like a reflex.
Like everything.
Yeah, it's like
say thanks to everything.
It almost loses its meaning, right? Because how often we use it. Every little thing. Someone gives us a change, we're like, thank you. Someone gives us our coffee, thank you. Whatever it is, someone kind of moves out of the way, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It becomes a reflex. We just add it on to like the end of every sentence
Right,
and every
right,
statement. And I was doing that here, and I quickly noticed that people were like, oh, you're way too polite. Like you don't
There's
need
no
to
need
be,
to
yeah,
thank.
you thank me.
Yeah.
This is what I do.
It's even off-putting sometimes if you're a friend
Yeah.
and you say thank you too much.
Yeah, well, even to me, like I got the feeling like people would like think I was like weak because I was saying thank you. Like,
yeah.
yo, you're too polite. Like you need to toughen up a little bit, kind of thing.
Right. I think things are getting better. 'Cause, I mean, if you're in the train station and there's big crowds, I say 不好意思,麻烦, and I see more and more people saying that to me too. I think things are really improving in China. Yeah, that way.
So I specifically try to observe this. A lot of what we're saying is filled with bias.
Yeah.
But not necessarily in a bad way. It's just like we only have experience like being in our own skin.
Yeah.
Right. And I see that like most of my friends, like my wife, colleagues, anyone that spent more time, let's say in China, or at least a good deal of time in China, they are appreciative, and like there are many moments where you would say thank you.
Yeah.
Because you're being provided a service, and in Shanghai, like things aren't easy. Like it's not like super chill, like in Taiwan or something, some small city. Like you're in a restaurant, and like operationally, service industry in Shanghai is incredible now. Like, I mean, from 15 years ago, it was like not as good. Now I think it's probably a lot better than most places in the world.
Yeah.
People are really working hard. They're trying to make a buck. And so like, I just see, generally speaking, there's a certain class of people maybe that I just naturally hang out with, right? Just pretty average class. But people are kind of appreciative. They say thank you, whatever. And I think it's recognized, right? I myself do have that habit, but I just try not to make it automatic. Like
Like more earned.
well, no, I'm not trying to comment on my own sort of like politeness or my, like how good values I have or whatever it is. But like I do have the habit of whenever something happens and I'm being provided a service, I think about that service. And because the service levels are really, really, really good in the world these days, I'm actually very appreciative. Whether it's you're taking a DD or in a restaurant, it's like people are nice in general in the world these days. Because we also are privileged. We live in big cities. Like we're definitely in the top point whatever percent in terms of, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm not a millionaire, but like, I mean, we're in the top 1% no matter what. So I do say thank you, and I see that it's appreciated. Like, it's not like they're like, oh, why the fuck he's, it's like, oh yeah, no, thank you. Like, I'm glad to help you. Like, a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I'm glad to help you, or like, guide or whatever it is, right? And I just think it's a nice, kind of nice thing.
Man, I think you're totally right, and I think Chinese can be too pessimistic about China, because so many Chinese will say, we're losing our values, or we're losing our etiquette and all that. I think it's getting better simply because it's getting more affluent. Yeah,
I think it's all like you made a few comments, but like in terms of affluence, power, and influence, 100%. I think that's driving a very, very, like, there's so many factors. Like, whatever thing you're looking at, there's always different factors, but power, influence, and wealth is probably at least one of the top factors in anything that you talk about, in any industry, in any country. Perception, like how people perceive you. It's all based on that, because that's what drives humanity.
But we can analyze this. So we're all agreeing that Chinese are much more polite than before, and it's going to get better and better, right? But we can analyze just the sentence I expressed, like 到火车站吧. That's just a much more direct way of speaking than you would experience in most of the Chinese-speaking world abroad, right?
But like, where does that norm of like 到火车站, is that like the norm here? Because I wouldn't say that even in China.
What would you say then? Maybe I'm just modeling myself. I'm very, rude, direct.
I'll tell you
Chinese.
what I'll say.
Maybe I'm rude. Yeah, I would say that.
Say 到车.
I would say
先生你好，你好先生，麻烦你，真的麻烦你，拜托，把我带到火车站，谢谢，谢谢，谢谢，谢谢。
I'm telling you, when I was in Tainan, I said that to a taxi driver. He started cursing me in Taiyu.
Oh.
Because he's like saying, I don't understand.
Well, what were you
Taiyu.
saying? You were saying 到火车站.
I literally said, 到火车站吧.
Dude, if someone started cursing me,
because he thinks he thinks I'm trying to take over the island. That's what he thinks.
He thinks you're the invader.
okay,
Right.
Wait a minute though. Like, you studied, like, you're like the only PhD in sociology. Like, like, what other factors could there have been that day though? Like, like, I mean, was he having a bad? I don't know, because I used to have the negativity. Like, I'm not saying you have a negativity bias, but like, I used to have a very strong negative, and I still do, but much less so. But these two gentlemen, no, I had like a very strong negativity bias, right? I like basically
First time hearing about it.
I interpreted everything in a negative way, and so anything someone would say, like, maybe they weren't even cursing me, but I would perceive it that way. But it's like, did you have enough data points to like, was it so overwhelming that every time you did that, there were truly a difference? Or do you think it was maybe just an outlier?
I think in China I would, but I haven't been in Taiwan that much. So it's a nice anecdote that kind of illustrates, what it illustrates is that, we're perceived a certain way depending, on our accents and this kind of thing. And, so it's really an anecdote. So I don't have enough data. And I think in general in Taiwan, I'm perceived correctly as being a Chinese American.
Yeah.
It used to be like when the first time I came to China was in 2001. I was in a summer language program in Beijing, and I met a girl who was studying at Tsinghua, and I met her on the old ICQ, which is a nice platform. It's long gone. It's long gone. But and I remember that we were in the dorm. The program was at Tsinghua University, so I was in the dorm at Tsinghua, and she was in my dorm room, and she was so nervous because like, I know we were alone. She thought we're going to sleep together now. And and she called her friend on the phone. She's like, oh my God, I'm in this room with this foreigner now. What's going to happen?
So
what's going to happen
fearful?
Now? Fearful, but very excited. I don't want to generalize too much about the opposite gender, but it's probably excited that way too, right? Because it's like dangerous and uncertain and really interesting, right?
Wait, how did
were you like a bad boy?
How did she said
That's
this
right.
in front
That's
of
right.
you? She said this in front of you?
No, she was making a phone call, but I kind of overheard. She wasn't trying to hide it either. But the point is that back then I was this dangerous foreigner. 2001, anything could happen. I could totally, abuse her, I guess, right? Which, I don't want to get too NPC, but that can be exciting too, especially if you're from a country where you never meet outsiders, right? And over time, back then I was a foreigner for sure, and my Chinese wasn't as good. That's a factor too. But over time, I think all of us, if we just observe, we're not considered foreigners anymore, and we're much more considered part of the Chinese experience. And I think a lot of people think I'm a Haigui, actually. And a good question is, how much should we even care, right? So if we say that being a Chinese American is a more authentic Westerner than a hike? Wait, aren't we just playing into this kind of pyramid where, being white's on top? So maybe we shouldn't even care about that. But I just know that if people think I'm from the U.S., then I'm treated somewhat differently and let's say better. But also, it's consistent with who I am. I'm actually not a hikeway, so it makes sense, right?
You know what's funny? It's I would I think I can relate to that, and I can tell you that when I blow up, people treat me really well here.
Oh yeah,
is that why you blow up so often? You get conditioned, like a positive reinforcement.
It's Pavlovian for me.
You mean like a business meeting or like in a service situation?
Service situation.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We've definitely witnessed that many times.
We've seen.
But that's just cultural. I think that's a cultural thing as well, because a lot. I don't want to make assumptions, but generally speaking, people are a little bit more passive. And so even there are people that I've worked with, certain people that are just really loud and just aggressive and getting what they want, and they will literally kick and scream to get it. They always get it. Yeah. Meanwhile, you have other people like, I would never do that. I could never do that. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it's just human nature.
Yeah. I guess to put it in context a little bit, like, I mean, if we were in the States and you made a lot of ruckus, kicking and screaming, you probably get what you want more times than not. I mean,
I don't know.
I guess how you went about it.
It depends on how you do it. I don't think kicking and screaming.
But if you
really
were
works.
like, I mean, if you're passive anywhere, you're always going to get overlooked.
Okay. Let me ask this, like all of you, a question, right? Like in the long run and overall, do you think that like what's more effective in getting what you want, aggression or diplomacy? Like if we look at the broader world, right? What's more effective? Is it diplomacy in general or is it aggression? Like getting a job, right? Getting promoted, like getting to climbing the corporate ladder, like making money, like getting deals done, right?
It has to be a smart combination of those two things.
I think without diplomacy, you get nothing. Honestly, so I think diplomacy is more. You have to be liked to get anywhere in any structure in a corporate whatever. So
Eric's but you killed everything that I've done in the past 15 years.
You got to be assertive too.
Eric's whole life has been wrecked just in those few seconds.
Go ahead. You got to be assertive too, but the base is people have to think you're an okay person.
That's interesting.
What's your thought on that then? Were you leaning more towards aggression?
No, I didn't have really a point of view on that. But what I see though is like when you look at like power dynamics, it feels like, at the higher up you go, the more things are at stake. There's a lot of like aggression. I mean, there's a lot of, like you look at people that are in power, like, yeah, there's a diplomatic aspect. But I think everyone can kind of practice diplomacy. That comes naturally to us, right? But to be able to like go out there and get what you want, I mean, I think you just don't see that side as much, right? But I think that's what's happening behind the scenes.
I tend to agree. I think like maybe to echo like even what Frank was saying, like I think if we look at a pyramid, I think like diplomacy would be at the bottom. Like you need to have that base of diplomacy because people need to like you. You need to be respected and all these things, right? But then at the top, you do have to have an element of, and it's also the nuance of the word. Like is aggressive and being assertive the same thing? Maybe it's not. Right? You can be assertive without being aggressive because aggressive usually comes with like a kind of a bad kind of connotation with it. Yeah. But like I feel like in this world, and again, depending on the specific context and realm we're talking about, I mean, I think the most successful people are a combination of diplomacy and assertiveness, right?
I want to bring this back around to the kind of big political discussion. It is related. I mean. You're right. I mean, you can't, if you don't tell your boss what you want, you're not going to get it, right? So you have to, because my girlfriend, she's from Serbia, and, one of the ways I criticized her over the last, year and a half is that in different work situations, she simply doesn't express what she wants, so she doesn't get it. And I thought to myself, that's very much an American trait. I mean, especially, in the U.S., if you don't ask for that promotion, you're not getting it, right? And that's you look at the data, that's different around different countries. A place like France, it won't be as pronounced. A place like Serbia, you just don't do that. And China's going to be, above Japan, but below the U.S. because in Japan but I think in China it's more assertive. But just to bring into the big discussion, we're changing the world. Like people read our business books, they go to our business schools. We're considered to be the truth, and that's increasingly the trend. And when I tell my girlfriend that, I think that's just the truth. If you don't say you want that promotion, you'll never get it. And that's the kind of invisible power America wields, you know, through culture and through the media and through publishing and business schools and education. Yeah.
So that reminds me of like kind of an anecdote. Like, and I was talking to my wife, and so she went to business school in Europe, and she was telling me this kind of this anecdote because you know, like in America, we have this thing called like fake it till you make it.
Yeah, right.
Kind of thing. It's like basically just bullshit until you kind of figure it out, right? So she laughed when somehow this reference came up, and so she said like when she was in business school. So like all the European, there's like lots of Europeans over. She was in Spain, right? And she said that they were talking about how different cultures carry on conversations. So like Americans, like whatever topic, like they'll just start talking about like they fucking know everything. Like you would, like like you might not know shit. So like they'd be in class, and then all Americans would just start speaking up, whether or not they knew what the fuck they were talking about, right?
Yeah.
And then she said like. And then the Europeans would observe this thing, right? And then, like, you know, she had conversations, and the Europeans would be like critical. They would be like, "Fucking idiots, right? These Americans, they don't know what they're talking about." And so, like in European meetings, they're listening more, they're observing it, and then when they have maybe a more well-formulated point of view, they like speak up,
Right?
But then the funniest thing was, then they like, you know, they had further conversations. So if there was Americans and Europeans in the same meeting, then the ultimate outcome was that like the Americans would start speaking up, just spewing bullshit, but the Europeans would never call them out on it.
Yeah, right.
Right? And so it's like, even though the Europeans are like, oh, like, you know, we don't like that, but ultimately, like, you know, the alphas kind of came, the alphaness, like, and I'm stereotyping. And so that was the irony of it. They were like, oh, fucking Americans, you know, all they do is just blab their mouth. But they never called them out on it. Well, they just let them do it.
So if you got the balls to take the mic, you're going to have balls to take the mic away from them too. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
That's a good way of putting it.
And you want to ask yourself why America. So America has a lot of good and bad qualities, but definitely that's one of the bad qualities. The way we're always bullshitting, and I call it self-promotion. But you got to understand. I mean, what I tell foreigners, not Americans, that we're on the frontier. We don't know anybody. We haven't been peasants for hundreds of years. We're not involved in a church for 100 years. No one knows who you are. You're on the frontier. You got to build a house. It's time to network. It's time to promote yourself. And you got 10 minutes.
Wood?
You got the elevator pitch. You know, maybe it's not 10 minutes, but you know, it's still not that long because you're out there in the frontier. You got to make friends fast. So I think it's part of our culture that's not like Europe at all.
Yeah.
You know, your business Crossroads, right?
Yeah,
and you said that you've been doing talks for like, 13 years or something like that, and then you officially started your company a few years ago. Like, how did you get started? Like, what's your like mission?
Like, what was the crux?
Yeah, what's your sort of business model, your mission, and then how has that sort of changed in the last couple? Has it changed the last couple of years with more tensions going on?
Yeah, so I was running events just for fun for about 10 years. I was working control risks, and then the EIU as a full-time office worker. So I couldn't put all my efforts into my events, but it just kind of blew up. I mean, it didn't blow up. It was gradual growth over 10 years, but I became very big. I was already the biggest talk organizer even when I was working full time. And so I quit the job at the EIU and I started my own company, do my passion. And that happened to be in the middle of COVID. So one of these great anecdotes is like, very pro-China anecdote I've actually expressed on BBC is like, you thought it was so bad for us, but I started an events company in the middle of the pandemic. So it was just about doing my passion. And of course it's changed. So we're both a community. It's both a community and a business. So some people have been coming for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And that's the community aspect, right? But after starting a company, of course, I have a membership system, do a lot more business talks. I think about what's going to make me more money too. But there's always a balance. So if you compare me to the like chambers or like there's other groups you might not. I used to work with the Economist Corporate Network. It's $100K a year. There's also a nice company called IMA. Then there's European American Chamber. So I'm priced way lower than them, even though I think my speakers certainly match or exceed them, and certainly my frequency does. But I do stuff.
Wait, so what's like what was $100K a year? The membership to
Economist.
Yeah, the Economist Corporate Network, a branch of the EIU, and in the Economist Group, the same magazine with the nice red logo. I used to work there.
100K US?
100,000 US, and you get 12 talks a year, and a briefing from the Economist. Now, who's paying for that? Coca-Cola's paying for that.
Yeah.
You know, Siemens is paying for that. Not you out of pocket.
Yeah.
They got the brand. They charge the money. I can't get that.
Yeah. Okay. So like,
Yeah.
then
Yet.
So
Yeah. Right.
Let's like kind of flip it like upside down. So like so your members, right? Half Chinese people, half like foreigners. Like, what's the value proposition for them?
So they're just really curious people, and they like the kind of like seeing like intellectual topics talked about in public. You know, a lot of lonely people. Honestly, I mean, maybe not lonely like you don't have friends, but you don't find those people you really have. You know, these kind of common intellectual interests. It's really isolating. You know, when we can't meet those people, right? And you know, people have dated, certainly had job collaborations. There's even been children over the years, so it's social as well.
Well, and that sounds like your passion.
Yeah,
that's something we talked about like in our last show. Like, well, how do you find like the right road to get on? How do you, because like your career is like this winding road kind of thing, right? And like sometimes it's like not obvious, and a lot of people aren't doing what they're really, really passionate about. But it sounds like you're one of the lucky few. I'm curious like what your path was.
Yeah, I mean, there's been two big turns. So when I was in college, I always thought I'd want to be a professor, and I did a PhD in sociology. I was undergrad in philosophy, actually. And then I just discovered that doesn't suit me, because if you want to be an academic, you got to sit in the room for a long time and read stuff on your own, often bad stuff, and spend time writing stuff no one's going to read. And so I hated being a PhD student and doing that. And so I knew I wanted to work in China. So I worked in China for about 10 years, mostly control risks, this political risk consultancy. I got more into that business, advising MNCs on their risks in China and other parts of the world. So kind of got an expertise in that. And then, while I was doing that, I was just doing all these talks, a lot of them for free, a lot of them with alumni clubs of mine, Johns Hopkins. And I got, 10,000 hours, you get good at that. And I really want to do that for my job. And that got me to the Economist corporate network. I was actually helping run the network. I hated it. And so I left that and I started my own job, my own company. So that's kind of been my path.
Wow.
If you think you want to work for Goldman Sachs, very few people who actually end up there, realize that was their whole path, right? And it's the same with me. We just don't know who we are until it's all learning by doing. Our theories about ourselves are totally, misguided, So it's all learning by doing. And so kind of to re-answer your question, and you did remind me what I wanted to say, is that I just feel like I make a difference. So I remember in 2019, before the pandemic, I went back to visit my alma mater, Tufts in Boston. I thought to myself, if I just died when I was 30, the world wouldn't miss me, right? But I've done this in Shanghai for all these years, and a lot of people have met each other because of me, and I feel like I made a huge difference. And now it's even more significant because we have these tensions, and I'm on media, and I'm the only game in town for these in-person events. So that also explains my business model. Like, why don't I go online? Why don't I stream? It's like I don't think I'm media. I think I'm events. And I don't have a media DNA. And I care about people meeting each other, and that's exactly why I don't put more work into that, Yeah. And that's gonna be, and you guys are media. I mean, you're a podcast, and I'm just not that. Right?
Well, that's the last few sentences you said are super duper inspiring, because it's like people buy sort of like not what you do, but why you do it.
Yeah.
And it's always about starting with sort of why. When you can articulate why we do something,
right,
then everything else just kind of follows, right? But if you can't articulate like what drives you, that purpose, then you're just the average person on the street doing a job.
But I would say that why only comes later, because so many young people think they know a why, but it's not really what they just don't know. It's very hard for us to know ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm actually a relatively introverted person. So I always say, if you want to like have a big network and make a lot of friends and find the people you really want to meet, start an event, because you're at the center, Your classic introvert, extrovert walks into a room and shakes everybody's hand. I'm more of an introvert, but I have the best mixer of my life.
You call everyone to you. You come to me.
I have the best mixer of my life 6 times a month. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah.
It's quite nice.
I think we have a lot in common in that way, because I would also describe myself as an introvert.
Yeah.
And what we've done with this show, I guess, is created a own platform where, like you, we can kind of meet people on our own terms.
Right.
In our own setting, on our own terms, where we feel we have control.
Right.
Where I don't have to walk into a strange room filled with people and be like, oh, hey, I'm Justin, and let me shake your hand and give you my business card,
Yeah.
Right? Like it's more self-contained in that way, where it is more intimate in a way.
Yeah, right.
And it jives with kind of what I'm more comfortable with.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Personally, I think these kind of offline face-to-face events or any type of activities that pertain to face-to-face that you cannot replicate online ideally is going to become even more important moving forward, because I feel like there's going to be some sort of lashback against this future that we're heading towards, which is more VR, AR, and just the way social media has been going these days. I feel like the importance of that face-to-face is going to become on the spotlight. You're going to have people really appreciate that much more than the virtual way of meeting.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important for you to continue this and build it.
Yeah. And you can tell, like, Frank, you can tell you're an honest person, because like twice you have referred to your own talks as one as average. That was a very average talk. Talking about guests you've had on, your own guests, and one was dry.
I love it. That's so great.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that way I like to throw up I kind of throw things on the wall and see what sticks. I like to do a lot. Because I am doing 70 a year. You can't know all 70 will be good, but I like to experiment.
Yeah,
that's super cool.
Well, same with our episodes, right? Not everyone's a home run, right?
Right. My thinking is, even if the talk's not good, it's still another chance for my members and other people to meet each other, and that's definitely worthwhile.
That's like super cool.
I always tell the speakers, the pressure's on you, not me, because you got one chance. I got 70 this year. If you suck, I'll be fine, but it's your reputation. So I'm a little different from the chambers and other groups, and I really want to make the speakers work, and I want them to give a full 45-minute talk. And this kind of thing. It's not like a panel.
You take a different approach. I think you seem kind of like in a good way edgy, like in the conversation. Because a lot of people come on the show and like it's like a kumbaya, and you come on and you're like, no, I'm not gonna fucking answer that, Justin. I like because we had we had met you and talked to you, so like there was a good vibe and stuff like that. But I like the edginess. And then we take this like less aggressive approach. That was maybe that was like a loaded question. I was like, do you like aggression or diplomacy? but on our show, then you see I
like the diplomacy. That's why I think it's so important, right?
He answered that question very clearly.
And then we like to kind of like we bring someone on like, oh no, right, and like kind of butter them up a little bit so that they can be like real chill and just be themselves, because like I think the selection process, like we're always trying to, get really great people on. I think Justin, you talked to most of them beforehand.
I think with our thing is like, it's more intimate because there's no
crowd
audience right now, right? It's like you in the room. And then like for us also, there is an added pressure of that, there is really only one dynamic to the podcast, which is the audio itself. For you, you do have kind of like a fail-safe in the sense that like, okay, if the talk wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, at least there's a networking aspect to it. You can rely on, right? And at the very least, people can meet each other and mingle, and there's value in that. Right? For us, there isn't that. There's this, what we're talking to you right now, the conversation we're recording to you right now. And if that isn't good, then the whole thing isn't good.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, man, I would think I've taken up enough of your time. Frank, thank you for coming on. You're welcome back on the show anytime. I think what you offer is definitely very valuable, because I will be the first to admit that, for me personally, like I am very self-aware of like, we get too stuck in our own bubbles, in our own way of thinking that gets self-reinforced all the time, because I think naturally we want to think we're right. We want to think, again, we're on the right side of history. We want to think we're smart and whatever you want to think about yourself. And that plays a role even subconsciously in reinforcing your beliefs. And I think, what I need to do more is to talk to other people more, to get outside my own head. And I think you offer a very refreshing piece of that. So thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it was a great experience.
Thank you. And
I feel like this is just the beginning. Like we'd love to have you back again and just shoot the shit more. Even just about the whole ABC experience, like we were saying before. Remember how we were just saying before we sat down, like, oh, we could talk about this.
That's a good topic.
Well, with Frank,
how you guys differ from traditional media is a great topic. Like I haven't done one of these before, and it's very different because on traditional media you got a 10-minute slot, often live, and this is very different and very interesting.
You got to hit the ground running on this.
Yeah, right.
We kind of like lean in on this one.
That'd be an interesting topic.
Hey, but Frank, where can people find you?
So my email would be fgt200@gmail.com, and maybe easier is my website, www.shanghai-review.org.
Cool.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
All right. That was Frank. I'm Justin.
I'm Eric.
And I'm Howie.
All right. Be good and be well. Peace.
There is a sad